The kid lifted a wooden hand plane out of the toolbox by the back of the blade and let it dangle from his fingers like a dirty rag. Yeah, these are old tools. We get tools, but we want power tools. Drill saws, sanders, stuff people actually use. Wooden hand planes and chisels and whatever. Those are like flea market stuff. Nobody buys them. Vernon Whitaker stood on the other side of the counter. 75 years old. His cap from the carpenter's local, 26 pulled low. His work-thickened hands resting on the edge of his father's old wooden tool chest. He watched a 26-year-old in a store polo dangle a 190-year-old beechwood plane by the iron, the way you would hold a dead mouse by the tail. "Could you set that down, son?" Vernon said. "That belonged to my great-great-grandfather." "Oh, sorry." The kid set the plane down on the counter. The wooden body made a soft thud against the laminate. "Look, I am being honest with you. Whole chest, all the tools inside. I can do $60. The chest itself is maybe worth 30 as a piece of furniture if I find the right buyer. $60. Here's what that kid in the pawn shop did not know. Here's what nobody in that shop knew. The wooden hand plane he had just dangled by the iron was made in Wrentham, Massachusetts in 1772 by a toolmaker named Caesar Chilor, the first known free black toolmaker in colonial America. Chilor had been the apprentice and later the freed slave of Francis Nicholson, the most famous American plane maker of the 18th century. Chilor's planes are some of the rarest and most historically significant woodworking tools ever made on American soil. There are fewer than 120 documented Chilor planes in existence. The one sitting on that pawn shop counter with a clear stamped maker mark and a date scratched into the heel was worth $68,000. And it was sitting in a wooden chest with 23 other hand tools that Vernon Whitaker's father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and his great-great-grandfather had used to build houses and barns and churches across rural Vermont for 190 years. This is the story of how Vernon walked into that pawn shop in Burlington on a Thursday afternoon hoping for $100 to fix his furnace, and how a man who knew exactly what he was looking at walked through the door 15 minutes later and made a phone call to the Smithsonian. Now let me tell you about Vernon. Vernon was born in 1950 in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, a small town in the Northeast Kingdom up where the hills get steep and the winters get long. He came from a family of carpenters going back as far as the family records went. His father, Earl Whitaker, was a journeyman carpenter who worked for 47 years building houses in Caledonia County. His grandfather, Howard, had been a carpenter before him. His great-grandfather, Frederick. His great-great-grandfather, Josiah Whitaker, had come to Vermont from Massachusetts in 1838 with a tool chest, a wagon, and a wife. Josiah had been a journeyman carpenter in Boston before moving north. 5 generations of Whitaker men working wood. Vernon was the last one. He was a union carpenter for 43 years until his shoulders gave out at age 66. The tool chest had passed from father to son for 5 generations. Earl gave it to Vernon in 2003 when Earl was 84 years old and finally accepted that he was not going to swing a hammer again. Vernon had used a few of the tools. The hand planes still cut beautifully. Vernon had used the longest one, a joiner, to true up the edges of cabinet boards on small jobs in his retirement. But he had never thought about the chest as anything other than his father's old tools. He had never opened it and asked himself how old any of it really was. Vernon's wife Peggy had passed in 2021. Heart attack. Sudden. She had been making coffee one Saturday morning and was gone before the pot finished brewing. They had been married 51 years. Their 2 kids, a son, Marcus, in Manchester, and a daughter, Keisha, in White River Junction. Both lived close enough to visit, but far enough that Vernon was alone most days. Now Vernon was 75 and the math had stopped working. Social Security, $1,720. His union pension, $1,140. Total, $2,860. After the property tax on the small house Earl had built in 1956, which Vernon had inherited. The homeowner's insurance, the utilities, the groceries, the gas for his 2008 Ford F-150, the prescriptions for his blood pressure and his shoulders and his diabetes, and the Medicare supplement. Vernon had about $85 left over each month. The problem was the furnace. The 1998 oil furnace in the basement had finally given up. It had been making sounds for 2 winters and had stopped working entirely on a Tuesday morning in March. The repairman from St. Johnsbury Heating had come out and looked at it for 10 minutes and said the words no homeowner wants to hear. Vernon, this thing is done. You need a new unit. Estimate for a basic replacement, $4,800. Vernon had $510 in savings. He thought about calling his son. Marcus was a manager at a sporting goods store in Manchester. He would have written the check that afternoon. Vernon did not call. He had spent 43 years in the union. He had built houses with his own hands. He was not going to ask his son for furnace money. He thought about what he could sell. The truck stayed. The house was the house. Earl's old hand tools were the only thing that anyone might pay for. He did not know what they were worth. He figured maybe $100 for the lot of them. Maybe $200 if he got lucky. Even $200 would not cover the furnace, but it would be a start. And Vernon was the kind of man who started. He carried the tool chest out to the F-150. It was heavy and his shoulders complained, but he managed. He drove the 40 miles south to Burlington because Burlington had bigger pawn shops than anything in St. Johnsbury, and he figured the prices might be better in the city. He pulled into the parking lot of Champlain Pawn on North Avenue. The kid behind the counter was named Aaron Petrosian, 26, tall, lean, dark hair cut short on the sides and longer on top, a small silver hoop in one ear. He was wearing a black store polo with the shop logo embroidered in white on the left chest, dark gray cargo pants, and black work boots, a clip-on name tag on his chest reading Aaron Sales. He had been working at Champlain Pawn for 2.5 years. He knew jewelry. He knew musical instruments. He played guitar. He knew modern power tools because his uncle was a contractor. He did not know hand tools. He did not know tool history. He had never heard the name Caesar Chalor in his life and would not have believed you if you told him a wooden plane could be worth more than his car. Vernon set the wooden tool chest on the counter. He unlatched the iron clasps. He lifted the lid. The interior of the chest was a piece of craftsmanship in itself. The lid had a hand-cut till, a small compartment for chisels and gouges with each tool resting in its own carved slot. The main compartment held 23 hand tools. There were 6 wooden planes of various sizes, 8 chisels, 2 handsaws, a brace and bit set, a marking gauge, a tri-square, a pair of dividers, a rabbet plane, and a small wooden mallet. The wood of the tools was darkened to a deep honey color from 190 years of hand oil and use. The iron of the planes and chisels was clean. Earl had kept everything oiled. Aaron looked into the chest. He reached in and lifted out the longest of the wooden planes, a joiner plane about 22 inches long with a beechwood body and an iron blade. By the back of the iron, he let it dangle. Vernon flinched. Yeah, these are old tools, wooden planes and chisels, flea market stuff. I can do $60 for the whole thing. Vernon looked at the chest, at the planes Earl had taught him to use, at the chisels his great-grandfather Frederick had handed down to his grandfather Howard, at the brace and bit that Josiah Whitaker had carried in a wagon from Boston to Vermont in 1838. $60 would not even pay for the service call on the furnace. He started to reach for the lid. The bell over the door rang. A man walked in carrying a leather messenger bag and a thermos of coffee. He was in his late 50s, medium height, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy gray wool sweater over a white Henley, dark canvas work pants, and brown leather boots that had been resoled more than once. He had a gray and brown beard neatly trimmed, and reading glasses pushed up on top of his head. His hands. Vernon noticed his hands immediately, the way carpenters notice carpenters. Hands were the hands of a man who worked wood. His name was Caleb Pruitt. He was 58 years old. a master furniture maker and antique tool historian based in Shelburne, Vermont. He ran a small handmade furniture studio that produced custom pieces for clients across New England. And on the side, he had spent the last 20 years authenticating antique American hand tools, particularly 18th and 19th century plane makers. He was a contributing editor for the Chronicle of the Early American Industries Association, the journal of record for antique American tool history. He had written 2 books on early American plane makers. He was one of fewer than 10 people in the United States who could authenticate a Caesar Chalor plane on site. Champlain Pawn's owner, a woman named Diane Beaumont, had Caleb on call for any old tools or woodworking items that came through the shop. She had texted him the moment Vernon walked in. "Old tool chest. Looks like the real deal. Get over here." Caleb walked toward the counter. He saw the open chest. He saw the wooden planes laid out inside. He stopped walking. He did not say anything for a long moment. He just looked. Then he looked at Vernon. "Sir, I am Caleb Pruitt. I appraise antique tools for this shop. May I examine your chest?" "Yes, sir." Caleb set his messenger bag on the counter. He took out a pair of cotton gloves, a small LED flashlight, and a magnifying loop. He put the gloves on. He approached the chest the way Vernon had seen old carpenters approach a piece of cherry wood that was about to become a tabletop, with patient respect. He examined the chest itself first, the dovetailed corners, the hand-forged iron clasps, the till in the lid. He ran his gloved fingers along the inside of the lid and stopped at a small carved inscription burned into the wood. "Josiah Whitaker, Boston, 1838. He read it aloud. He looked at Vernon. "Your family, great-great-grandfather. He brought it from Boston when he came to Vermont." Caleb nodded slowly. Then he reached into the chest and lifted out the longest of the wooden planes. He held it carefully by the body, never by the iron. He turned it over and looked at the heel. He looked at the toe. He examined the throat. He brought the loop up to the heel. He went very still. He took the LED flashlight and held it at a grazing angle across the wood. He read the maker mark stamped into the heel of the plane. C. Chalor, living in Wrentham. He stood up straight. He set the plane down very gently on a soft cloth he had unfolded on the counter. Then he reached back into the chest and lifted out a smaller smoothing plane. He examined the heel. Same stamp. Then a jack plane. Same stamp. Then a rabbit plane. Different maker. A Francis Nicholson stamp. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He took a breath. He opened his eyes. "Mr. Whitaker, Vernon Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, do you know what these planes are? They are my father's old planes. They came down from his father and his father and his father. My great-great-grandfather, Josiah, brought the chest from Boston in 1838. Josiah Whitaker was a journeyman carpenter in Boston before he came to Vermont. That's what my father always said." Caleb nodded. He pointed to the longest plane on the cloth. This plane was made by a man named Caesar Chalor. Chalor was an enslaved African man who became the apprentice of Francis Nicholson, who was generally considered the first commercial plane maker in colonial America. Nicholson freed Chalor in his will in 1753, and Chalor went on to operate his own plane-making shop in Wrentham, Massachusetts until his death in 1784. He is the first known free black toolmaker in American history. His planes are stamped with his maker mark. C. Chalor, living in Wrentham. He picked up the second plane. "Your great-great-grandfather Josiah, working as a journeyman carpenter in Boston in the early 1800s, would have inherited or purchased these planes from an older carpenter, someone who had bought them new from Chalor's shop in the 1770s or earlier. By 1838, when Josiah moved to Vermont, these planes were already 60 or 70 years old. They were already considered fine antique tools. He pointed to a small detail near the throat of the longest plane, and this date scratched into the heel here. 1834 was probably added by the man Josiah purchased the plane from. marking the year of the sale or the year of an inspection. I have seen this kind of dating before on Chalor planes. It is part of the provenance. Caleb set the plane down. He looked at the chest. He looked at the four Chalor planes laid out on the cloth. He looked at the Nicholson Rabbit plane. He looked at the chisels, some of which Vernon would later learn were also early American makers. Mr. Whitaker, Caleb said, this chest contains four documented Caesar Chalor planes. Four, in original condition, with continuous family ownership traceable to 1838. There are fewer than 120 documented Chalor planes in the world. Major collections, Colonial Williamsburg, Old Sturbridge Village, the Smithsonian, have one or two each. To find four together in their original chest, with the original carpenter's name burned into the lid, with 5 generations of family use and care. This is the most significant antique tool find in American woodworking history that I know of in the last 20 years. He paused. The longest plane, the one with the 1834 date, alone at a specialized antique tool auction through Brown Auction Services or Martin Donnelly Antique Tools, would be valued at $68,000. The other 3 Chalor planes together would add another $75,000 to $90,000. The Nicholson Rabbit plane, $12,000 to $15,000. The chisels and saws and the chest itself, another $25,000 to $35,000. He took a breath. For the complete archive, with provenance documentation and authentication, the value is approximately $185,000 to $220,000. The shop was silent. Vernon had not moved. His work-thickened hands were on the edge of the counter. Aaron, the pawn shop kid, was staring at the chest with his mouth open, his name tag rising and falling slowly with his breathing. Caleb pulled his phone out of his pocket. He looked at Vernon. Mr. Whitaker, I would like to call the Smithsonian's American History Division about this. They have wanted a complete documented Chalor archive for 40 years. May I make the call? Vernon nodded slowly. He was thinking about Earl handing him the chest in 2003. He was thinking about Earl's father, Howard, and about Frederick before him, and about Josiah loading a wagon in Boston in 1838 with a wife and a tool chest that was already the most valuable thing he owned. Even though Josiah did not know it, 5 generations of Whitaker men, 5 generations of work-thickened hands, 5 generations who had taken care of those tools and never knew what they were sitting on. My father never knew, Vernon said quietly. He used those planes to build houses for 47 years. He never knew. He knew exactly what they were, Caleb said. He knew they were good tools and they were his father's. That is the only reason I am standing here looking at them. Every man in your family understood that they mattered. They just did not know the history behind why they mattered. Aaron cleared his throat. Sir, I did not know. I should not have lifted it that way. I should not have said $60. Vernon looked at him. He did not have anger in him. He had spent 43 years in the Carpenters Union teaching apprentices how to handle tools. Son, Vernon said, you never lift a plane by the iron. The iron is the cutting edge. You hold it by the body. That is the first thing you learn the first day you pick up a hand plane. My father taught me when I was 9 years old. Yes, sir. I am not angry at you. I am just telling you. The next time someone walks in here with a wooden box full of old tools, ask them about the tools before you decide what they are worth. Aaron nodded. He looked at the 4 planes on the cloth, at the maker marks he had not even noticed, at the date scratched into the heel, at the careful way Caleb held each one. Can I ask you something, Mr. Whitaker? Of course. How do you hold it? The right way. Vernon reached for the longest plane. He picked it up with both hands, one hand supporting the toe, one hand supporting the heel, the body resting in his palms, like this. You support the weight. You never grab it by the iron. You never let it dangle. You treat it like what it is, a tool that someone made with their hands. A tool that someone used to build something, a tool that mattered to someone. He set it back down on the cloth. Aaron nodded. I will remember that. Good. Diane Beaumont, the owner, came out from the back office. She had been watching on the security camera. She had heard everything. She walked over to Vernon. Mr. Whitaker, I am so sorry. If Aaron had damaged any of those tools, I would never have forgiven myself. He did not damage them, Vernon said. He just did not know what they were. No one would have known, Diane said, except Caleb. She looked at Caleb. Thank God you were available. Caleb was already on his phone, typing out an email, attaching photographs of the maker marks, the inscription, the dovetailed chest. He hit send. He looked up. I just emailed Dr. Loretta Hayes at the Smithsonian. She is the head of early American history. She's been trying to acquire a Chaleur plane for 15 years. He smiled. I think she is going to want to talk to you, Mr. Whitaker. Diane turned to Vernon. Caleb will handle everything. The authentication, the documentation, the placement. We will not take a commission. This is not a pawn shop transaction anymore. This is history. Vernon did not know what to say. Thank you. Diane shook his hand. No, thank you for bringing this in, for taking care of it all these years, for giving us the chance to see it. Caleb closed the chest carefully. He latched the iron clasps. He looked at Vernon. Can I help you carry this back to your truck? Yes, thank you. They walked out together. Aaron held the door. Vernon and Caleb set the chest gently in the bed of the F-150. Caleb looked at Vernon. Can I come see you this weekend, at your home? I need to document everything. Photograph the tools. Research your family genealogy. Build the provenance file. Of course. Where do you live? St. Johnsbury. Caleb nodded. I will be there Saturday morning. 9 o'clock. Vernon shook his hand. I will have the coffee on. Caleb smiled. Good. Vernon drove home. The chest in the bed of the truck. 40 miles north through the hills of Vermont. He did not turn on the radio. He just drove. And he thought about his father. Earl had given him that chest in 2003. 22 years ago, Vernon had been 53. Earl had been 84. They had been standing in Earl's garage, the same garage where Earl had taught Vernon to sharpen a chisel when Vernon was 10, where Earl had taught him to read wood grain when he was 12, where Earl had taught him to cut a mortise and tenon joint when he was 15. Earl had pointed to the chest. That was my father's, and his father's before him. It's yours now. Take care of it. Vernon had taken it home. He had used a few of the tools, but mostly the chest had sat in the corner of his own garage. Closed, safe, waiting. Earl had died in 2007, 4 years after giving Vernon the chest. He had been 88. He had died in his sleep. Vernon had gone through Earl's things, the house, the tools, the photographs, and he had found a small notebook, Earl's handwriting, notes about times, measurements, sketches, and on the last page, a note. The tool chest belonged to my grandfather Howard. He said it came from his father, Frederick. Frederick said it came from his father, Josiah. Josiah brought it from Boston in 1838. I do not know how old the tools are, but they are good tools. I have used them all my life. Take care of them, Vernon. They are yours now. Vernon had kept that notebook. It was in his kitchen drawer. He would show it to Caleb on Saturday. When Vernon got home, he carried the chest inside. He set it on the kitchen table. He unlatched the clasps. He lifted the lid. He looked at the 4 Chaleur planes, at the maker marks he had never noticed, at the date 1834 scratched into the heel, at the Nicholson rabbit plane, at the chisels, the saws, the brace and bit. He thought about Caesar Chaleur, a man he had never heard of until today, an enslaved man who became free, a toolmaker who stamped his name into every plane he made, C. Chaleur, living in Wrentham. He thought about Josiah, loading a wagon in Boston in 1838, packing this chest carefully, bringing it north to Vermont, using these tools to build his first house, his first barn. He thought about Frederick, learning the trade from Josiah, using these same planes. He thought about Howard, learning from Frederick. He thought about Earl, learning from Howard, teaching Vernon. 5 generations, one set of tools. Vernon closed the lid. He sat down at the kitchen table. He thought about the furnace, about the $4,800 he did not have. He thought about the $60 Aaron had offered. He thought about the $185,000 to $220,000 Caleb had said the chest was worth. He thought about what he would do with that money. If it was real, if the Smithsonian really wanted it. He would fix the furnace first. That was the reason he had gone to the pawn shop in the first place. He would set up college funds for his grandchildren, Malik, Amani, Aaliyah, so they could go to school without the weight of debt that so many young people carried now. He would send money to Marcus and Keisha, not because they needed it, but because it would come from Josiah, from 5 generations of work, and they should have a piece of that. And he would keep some, enough to stop worrying, enough to sleep at night. Vernon got up. He made himself a sandwich. He ate it standing at the counter. Then he called Marcus. His son answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad." "Marcus, something happened today. Are you okay?" "I am fine, but I need to tell you something." Vernon told him the whole story. The furnace, the pawn shop, Aaron, Caleb, the 4 Chalor planes, the Smithsonian. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, are you telling me Grandpa's old tool chest is worth $200,000? That's what the experts said, and the Smithsonian wants it. They are going to call me. That's what Caleb said." Marcus laughed, not a disbelieving laugh, a stunned laugh. "Dad, I do not even know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. Can I come up this weekend? I want to see it before it goes to a museum." "Caleb is coming Saturday morning to document everything." "You should come. Bring Malik." "I will." Vernon hung up. He called Keisha. He told her the same story. She cried. "Dad, I cannot believe this. Neither can I. Grandpa's tools. Your great-great-great-grandfather's tools." Keisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are going to be okay now." "Aren't you? I am going to be okay." "Good. You deserve this, Dad. You have worked so hard your whole life. I am just glad the tools are going somewhere. People will see them. Somewhere Caesar's name will be remembered." "Who is Caesar?" "The man who made the planes. I will tell you the whole story when you come up. I will be there Saturday." Vernon hung up. He walked into the living room. He sat down in his chair, the one Earl had built for him 40 years ago. Solid maple, mortise and tenon joints, no nails, no screws, just wood and glue and craftsmanship. He closed his eyes. He thought about tomorrow, about the next day, about Saturday when Caleb would come with his camera and his notebook and his questions, about the Smithsonian calling, about the chest leaving his house, going to Washington, D.C., being displayed in a museum, about Caesar Chalor's name on a placard for millions of people to see. Vernon fell asleep in that chair. He slept better than he had in months. Saturday morning, Caleb arrived at 9 o'clock exactly. He parked in the driveway. He got out carrying a large camera bag, a tripod, a laptop case, and a leather notebook. Vernon had the coffee on. Marcus was already there. He had driven up from Manchester the night before. He had brought Malik, his 12-year-old son. Keisha arrived 20 minutes later. She brought her 2 daughters, Imani, who was 9, and Aaliyah, who was 7. They all stood around the kitchen table. The tool chest open, the 23 tools laid out on a white sheet Vernon had spread across the table. Caleb set up his camera. He photographed each tool individually. Front, back, heel, 2, throat, maker marks. He measured each one. He wrote down the measurements in his notebook. He photographed the chest, the dovetailed corners, the till, the tool slots, the inscription, Josiah Whitaker, Boston, 1838. He looked at Vernon. Do you have any family records? Birth certificates, marriage licenses, anything that traces your lineage back to Josiah? I have some things. Let me get them. Vernon went to his bedroom. He came back with a cardboard box. Inside were papers, documents, photographs, birth certificate for Earl Whitaker, 1919, birth certificate for Howard Whitaker, 1891, marriage license for Frederick Whitaker and Mary Johnson, 1883, census record from 1850, showing Josiah Whitaker, age 42, occupation carpenter, birthplace Massachusetts. Caleb went through everything. He photographed each document. He looked at Vernon. This is perfect. This gives us a clear line from Josiah to you. 5 generations, all documented. He opened his laptop. He started typing. He said, Josiah Whitaker was born in Massachusetts around 1808. He worked as a journeyman carpenter in Boston from approximately 1828 to 1838. In 1838, he moved to Vermont with his wife Ruth and their infant son Frederick. He settled in St. Johnsbury. He built a house. He worked as a carpenter in Caledonia County for the rest of his life. He died in 1876, age 68. Frederick Whitaker, born 1837, learned the carpentry trade from his father Josiah, married Mary Johnson in 1883, had 3 children. One of them was Howard Whitaker, born 1891, learned the trade from Frederick, worked as a carpenter in St. Johnsbury his entire life, had 2 children. One of them was Earl Whitaker, born 1919, learned the trade from Howard, worked as a union carpenter for 47 years, had 1 child, Vernon Whitaker, born 1950, learned the trade from Earl, worked as a union carpenter for 43 years, 5 generations, 1 trade, 1 set of tools. Caleb looked up from his laptop. This is exactly what the Smithsonian wants. Not just the tools, the story. Marcus was standing next to the table, looking at the 4 Chaleur planes. He said, I never knew any of this. I knew Grandpa Earl was a carpenter. I knew Dad was a carpenter, but I did not know it went back 5 generations. Vernon said, your great-great-great-grandfather Josiah built the first house your family ever owned. With these tools. Malik leaned over the table. He looked at the longest plane, the joiner. Can I touch it? Vernon looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded. Show him how. Vernon picked up the plane. He held it with both hands, supporting the toe and the heel. Like this. You never grab it by the iron. You hold it by the body. He handed it to Malik. Malik held it carefully, the way Vernon had shown him. It's heavy. It's solid beech wood, and it's almost 250 years old. Malik turned it over. He looked at the maker mark stamped into the heel. C. Chaleur. Living in Wrentham. Who was C. Chaleur? A man named Caesar Chaleur. He was the first free black toolmaker in America. He made this plane in the 1770s. Malik looked at his grandfather. This is really worth $68,000. That's what the expert says. Wow. Malik set the plane down carefully on the white sheet. Caleb finished his documentation by noon. He packed up his camera, his tripod, his laptop. He shook Vernon's hand. I will send all of this to Dr. Hayes at the Smithsonian today. She will call you early next week. Thank you, Caleb. No, thank you for preserving this, for bringing it in, for letting me be part of this. Caleb left. Vernon made lunch for everyone. Sandwiches, chips, iced tea. They sat around the kitchen table. The tool chest closed now. Sitting in the center of the table, Marcus said, Dad, what are you going to do with the money if the Smithsonian buys it? Vernon had been thinking about this for 3 days. First, fix the furnace. That's why I went to the pawn shop in the first place. Second, set up college funds for the three of you. He looked at Malik, Imani, Aaliyah, 20,000 each. So you can go to college without debt, Malik said. Really, really, thank you, Grandpa. Vernon looked at Marcus and Keisha. Third, I am going to send each of you 15,000. It's not from me, it's from Josiah, from 5 generations of work. You should have a piece of that. Dad, Marcus said, you do not have to do that. I know, but I am going to. Keisha wiped her eyes. Thank you, Dad. Vernon nodded. And the rest, I am going to keep, so I can stop worrying about money, so I can sleep at night, Marcus said. You deserve that. Vernon looked at the chest. I keep thinking about all of them. Josiah, Frederick, Howard, Earl. They all used these tools. They all took care of them. They all passed them down. And none of them knew what they were sitting on, Keisha said, but they knew the tools mattered. That's why they took care of them. Exactly. Monday afternoon, Vernon's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. This is Vernon. Mr. Whitaker, this is Dr. Loretta Hayes. I am the head of early American history at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Yes, ma'am, I received the documentation from Caleb Pruitt this weekend. The photographs, the genealogy, the provenance file. Mr. Whitaker, I have been trying to acquire a documented Caesar Chalor plane for 15 years. To have the opportunity to acquire 4 in their original chest with continuous 5-generation family ownership. This is extraordinary. Vernon did not know what to say. Thank you. I would like to fly to Vermont this week to see the collection in person, to meet you, to discuss acquisition. Of course. Would Thursday work? Yes, Mom. I will fly into Burlington Wednesday evening. I will drive to St. Johnsbury Thursday morning. Would 9 o'clock be acceptable? Yes, Mom. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I will see you Thursday. She hung up. Vernon sat down. It was real. The Smithsonian was coming. Thursday morning, Dr. Loretta Hayes arrived at 9 o'clock. She was a tall woman, thin, wearing a long gray wool coat over a burgundy dress. She had short, natural hair, silver at the temples. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She shook Vernon's hand. Mr. Whitaker, it is an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, ma'am. Please call me Loretta. She came inside. Vernon had coffee ready. They sat at the kitchen table, the tool chest in front of them. Vernon opened the lid. Loretta put on a pair of white cotton gloves. She lifted out the longest plane, the joiner. She examined it the way Caleb had, carefully, respectfully. She looked at the maker mark, C. Chalor, living in Wrentham. She looked at the date scratched into the heel, 1834. She set it down on the white sheet. She examined the other 3 Chalor planes, the Nicholson Rabbit plane, the chisels, the saws. She did not speak for 20 minutes. Then she closed the chest. She looked at Vernon. Mr. Whitaker, do you understand what you have here? I am starting to. This is not just about the monetary value. This is about American history. Caesar Chalor is one of the most important figures in early American craft history that almost nobody knows about. He was a black man, enslaved, who learned a trade at the highest level, who was freed, who built a business, who stamped his name and his freedom into every piece of work he did. There are fewer than 120 documented Chalor planes in the world. Most of them are in museums. Colonial Williamsburg has 2. Old Sturbridge Village has 1. We have one at the Smithsonian. To find 4, together, in one family, with this level of provenance. She paused. This fills a gap in our national story, a gap that has been there for 250 years. Vernon listened. He thought about Earl, about the way Earl had handed him the chest in 2003 and said, "These were my father's, and his father's before him. Take care of them." Earl had taken care of them, and now they were going to the Smithsonian. Loretta said, I would like to make an offer. The Smithsonian would like to acquire the complete archive, the chest, all 23 tools, for permanent display in our early American craftsmanship gallery. We are prepared to offer $215,000. Vernon had known this was coming, but hearing the number out loud, in his kitchen, from the head of early American history at the Smithsonian, it still did not feel real. That is very generous, Loretta said. This is not generosity, Mr. Whitaker. This is fair market value, possibly even conservative. At a specialized antique tool auction, the four Chalor planes alone could bring 250,000 or more. But we are not an auction house. We are a museum. And our mission is to preserve and display American history for the public. If you sell to us, these tools will be seen by millions of people. Caesar Chalor's name will be known. Your family's story will be told. Vernon nodded. That is what I want. Loretta smiled. Then we have a deal. She pulled a folder out of her briefcase. Inside were contracts, acquisition agreements, provenance forms. Vernon read through them. Loretta explained each section. The Smithsonian would take ownership of the chest and all 23 tools. They would be permanently displayed in the early American craftsmanship gallery. The display would include the full story: Caesar Chalor, Francis Nicholson, Josiah Whitaker, 5 generations of the Whitaker family. Vernon would receive $215,000, minus a small fee for Caleb Pruitt's authentication and documentation work. Vernon signed. Loretta signed. They shook hands. Loretta said, "We will arrange for a secure transport company to pick up the chest next week. The gallery opening is scheduled for October. 6 months from now, you and your family are invited. We will cover your travel and accommodations." "Thank you." Loretta stood. She looked at the chest one more time. She said, "Mr. Whitaker, your family preserved something that most of the world forgot. You did not know you were doing it, but you did it. That matters." Vernon walked her to the door. After she left, he sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at the chest. In 1 week, it would be gone. After 190 years in the Whitaker family, 5 generations, it would go to Washington, D.C. It would be displayed in a museum. Caesar Chalor's name would be known. Vernon thought that was right. The check arrived 2 weeks later, $215,000, minus Caleb's fee of $13,000. Vernon deposited $202,000. The next day, he called St. Johnsbury Heating. They installed a new high-efficiency furnace, $5,400. Vernon paid in full. For the first time in 3 years, his house was warm. He set up 3 college funds, 1 for each grandchild: Malik, Imani, Aaliyah, 20,000 each. He went to the bank. He set up the accounts. He signed the paperwork. The banker said, "These kids are lucky to have you," Vernon said. "I am lucky to have them." He wrote 2 checks, one to Marcus, $15,000, one to Keisha, $15,000. He put them in envelopes. He wrote notes. "This money comes from your great-great-great-grandfather, Josiah Whitaker. He brought a tool chest from Boston in 1838. He used those tools to build a life for his family. 5 generations later, that work is being honored at the Smithsonian. You are part of that story. This is your share. Love, Dad." He mailed the envelopes. He kept $80,000 in savings for the first time since 1972. Vernon Whitaker did not have to worry about money. Marcus drove up the following weekend. He had not been to St. Johnsbury in 7 months. They sat in the kitchen and drank coffee. Marcus said, "Dad, I got your check and your note. You do not have to thank me. I am going to anyway." "Thank you." Marcus looked around the kitchen. He said, "I never knew Grandpa's tools were anything special. He just used them to fix things," Vernon said. "That's what tools are for son. The fact that they were special is just a thing we found out at the end." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I wish I had paid more attention when Grandpa tried to teach me. Vernon said, you can still learn. You have a son. I know. I have been thinking about that. Marcus looked at his father. I want to teach Malik, not to be a carpenter, but to understand what it means to build something with your hands, to take care of your tools, to respect the work. Vernon nodded. Your grandfather would like that. I'm going to start this summer. Maybe build a workbench together. Or a bookshelf. That is a good place to start. Marcus smiled. Will you help? Of course. 3 weeks later, Vernon received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope, postmarked Boston, Massachusetts. The return address said, Precious Johnson, Dorchester. Vernon did not know anyone named Precious Johnson. He opened the letter. Inside was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. Dear Mr. Whitaker, my name is Precious Johnson. I am 68 years old. I live in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I am a genealogist. I have spent the last 30 years researching the history of free black families in colonial New England. Last month, I read an article in the Boston Globe about the Whitaker tool chest in the 4 Caesar Chalor planes that were donated to the Smithsonian. I believe I am a descendant of Caesar Chalor. I have been researching Caesar for almost 15 years. The records are fragmentary, but I have found enough to trace a line. Caesar Chalor had at least one son, named Francis, after Francis Nicholson, his teacher in The Man Who Freed Him. Francis Chalor married a woman named Abigail in 1776. They had children. One of them, a son named James, moved to Boston in the early 1800s. James had children. One of them moved to Chicago during the Great Migration in 1917. That line leads to me. I am the 7th generation descended from Caesar Chalor, and I wanted to thank you. You preserved my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's legacy. Most of the world forgot him, but your family did not. You took care of his work. You passed it down. You made sure it survived. And now, because of you, Caesar Chalor is in the Smithsonian. His name will be remembered. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. If you are ever in Boston, I would be honored to meet you. Sincerely, Precious Johnson. Vernon read the letter twice, then he called Caleb. Caleb answered, Vernon, I just got a letter from a woman in Boston. She says she is a descendant of Caesar Chalor. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What is her name? Precious Johnson. I know that name. She is a well-known genealogist. She has published research on free black families in Massachusetts. If she says she is descended from Caesar, she probably is, Vernon said. She wants to meet. You should meet her. I think I should too. Vernon called the number at the bottom of Precious Johnson's letter. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Mrs. Johnson, this is Vernon Whitaker. From Vermont. Mr. Whitaker. Oh my goodness, thank you for calling. I got your letter. I hope it was not too forward. When I read about the tool chest, about the 4 Chalor planes, I had to reach out. I'm glad you did. They talked for over an hour. Precious told him about her research, about the fragmentary records she had pieced together over 15 years, about how hard it was to trace black families in the 1700s because so many records were lost or never kept in the first place. She told him about finding Caesar's name in the Wrentham Town tax records from 1764, listed as a property owner, about finding Francis Chalor's marriage record in a church archive in Boston, 1776, about finding James Chalor's name in the 1820 census, listed as a free black carpenter in Boston, about tracing the line from James to Chicago, and from Chicago to herself, she said. When I read that article in the Globe about your family preserving those 4 planes for 5 generations, I cried. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather made something that lasted 250 years. Most people do not get to say that, Vernon said. Would you like to come to Vermont? I would like to meet you. Precious was quiet for a moment. I would love that. 2 weeks later, Precious Johnson drove to St. Johnsbury from Boston. She brought her daughter, a woman named Amani, 42 years old, a high school history teacher. Vernon made coffee. They sat in the kitchen. Precious was a small woman, 78 years old. She wore a purple cardigan and a silver cross necklace. Her hair was white, cut short. Her hands were small but strong. She brought a folder. Inside were copies of documents, tax records from Wrentham, Massachusetts, 1764, showing Caesar Chalor as a property owner, a marriage certificate from Boston, 1776, Francis Chalor and Abigail Parker, census records from 1820, showing James Chalor, free black, carpenter, age 34, birth records from Chicago, 1918, showing Precious Johnson's grandfather, named Clarence Chalor. Precious showed Vernon each document. She said, "This is the line. Caesar to Francis, to James, to William, to Clarence, to my father Jerome, to me. 7 generations." Vernon looked at the documents. He said, "The chest is gone now. It went to the Smithsonian last month. But I have photographs." He pulled out his phone. He showed her the pictures Caleb had taken. The 4 Chalor planes laid out on the white sheet. The maker marks, C. Chalor, living in Wrentham. Precious touched the screen. She said, "My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather made those." Yes. She started to cry. Amani put her arm around her mother. Vernon said, "Would you like to come with us to Washington? The gallery opening is in October. The Smithsonian is covering my travel. I am sure they would include you." Precious looked up. "Really? Really? You are family. Not my family, but Caesar's family. You should be there." Precious nodded. "I would be honored." Vernon called Loretta Hayes that evening. He told her about Precious Johnson, about the genealogy research, about the 7-generation line from Caesar Chalor. Loretta said, "This is wonderful. We would love to include her in the opening. I will add her name to the guest list. We will cover her travel and accommodations." "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. This is exactly what we hope for. Not just the tools, the story, the people, the connections." Vernon hung up. He sat in his chair, the one Earl had built. He thought about Caesar Chalor, standing in a shop in Wrentham, Massachusetts in 1772, planning a piece of beach, stamping his maker mark into the heel. C. Chalor, living in Wrentham. He thought about Francis Chalor, Caesar's son, named after the man who freed his father. He thought about James, about William, about Clarence, about Jerome, about Precious. 7 generations descended from Caesar, 5 generations of Whitakers who had preserved Caesar's work. And now they were all going to Washington, to see those planes in a museum, to honor Caesar Chalor's name. The summer passed. Vernon kept busy. He helped Marcus and Malik build a workbench in Marcus' garage. A simple design, 2x4s and plywood. But solid, well-made. Malik learned to use a circular saw, a drill, a square. Vernon showed him how to measure twice and cut once, how to check for square, how to sand with the grain. When they finished, Malik stood back and looked at the bench. He said, "We made that." Ish. Vernon said, "You did." Malik ran his hand along the top. "It's not perfect. It does not have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." September came. Vernon received a package from the Smithsonian. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to the opening of the Early American Craftsmanship Gallery at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, Friday, October 15th, 6 p.m., featuring the Whitaker tool chest, 5 generations of one carpenter's family, with 4 planes by Caesar Chalor, the first known free black toolmaker in colonial America. Vernon called Marcus, Keisha, Precious. They were all coming. Marcus, Keisha, Malik, Imani the younger, Aaliyah, Precious and her daughter Imani the elder. All of them. October 15th arrived. Vernon flew to Washington, D.C. on Thursday. Marcus and his family drove down from Manchester. Keisha and her family drove from White River Junction. Precious and Imani flew from Boston. They all stayed in a hotel near the National Mall. Vernon had never stayed in a hotel that nice in his life. Friday evening, they took a car to the museum. The early American craftsmanship gallery had been redesigned. New lighting, new cases, new wall text. And in the center of the room, a large glass case. Inside was the Whitaker tool chest. The lid was open. All 23 tools were laid out on a dark blue fabric backing. The 4 Chandler planes were arranged in the center. The longest one, Orion, the joiner with the 1834 date, was in the front. The Nicholson rabbit plane sat beside them. The chisels, the saws, the brace and bit, the marking gauge, the tri-square, all arranged carefully. Above the case on the wall was a large reproduction of Josiah's inscription. Josiah Whitaker, Boston, 1838. And below it, a placard, the Whitaker tool chest. 5 generations of one carpenter's family, St. Johnsbury, Vermont, with 4 planes by Caesar Chalor, circa 1772, the first known free black toolmaker in colonial America, and 1 rabbit plane by Francis Nicholson, circa 1750, donated by the Whitaker family. Vernon stood in front of the case. Marcus and Keisha stood beside him. The grandchildren pressed their faces close to the glass. Precious stood on the other side, her hand on the glass, tears running down her face. Loretta Hayes came over. She shook Vernon's hand. "Mr. Whitaker, thank you for preserving this, for sharing it." Vernon shook his head. "I did not do anything. My father did, and his father, and his father. You brought it here. That is what matters." Loretta turned to Precious. "Mrs. Johnson, it is an honor to meet you. The honor is mine. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a remarkable man." Precious nodded. She looked at the planes in the case. She said, "I wish I had a photograph of him." Loretta smiled. "You have something better. You have his work." Precious wiped her eyes. "Yes, I do." The gallery was full of people, historians, museum staff, donors, press. A reporter from the Washington Post interviewed Vernon. She asked him how it felt to see the chest in the museum. Vernon said, "It feels right. These tools were hidden for almost 200 years. Now people will see them. Now Caesar Chalor's name will be known." The reporter asked Precious how she felt. Precious said, "My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was enslaved. He was freed. He built a business. He made beautiful things. And the world forgot him. But Mr. Whitaker's family did not forget. They took care of his work. They passed it down. And now he is here, in the nation's museum. That is everything." The article ran the next day. The headline read, "From Pawn Shop to Smithsonian. How a Vermont Carpenter's Tool Chest Revealed a Hidden American Story." Vernon flew home on Sunday. He went back to his small house in St. Johnsbury. He went back to his life. But something had changed. 3 weeks after the opening, Vernon got a call from a man named Wendell Pierce. Wendell was 74 years old, a retired Finnish carpenter from Montpelier. He had read about the Whitaker tool chest in the Burlington Free Press. He said, "Mr. Whitaker, I worked with your father Earl in 1973. We built a house together in Plainfield." Vernon said, "I remember my father talking about that job. Earl was the best Finnish carpenter I ever worked with. He let me use one of his hand planes once, a long one, a jointer. He told me it had been his father's. He showed me how to hold it, how to set the iron, how to read the grain. I did not know it was worth $68,000, but I knew it was valuable because Earl treated it like it was. Vernon smiled. That sounds like my father, Wendell said. There is a group of us, old carpenters. We meet at Louse Diner in St. Johnsbury every Saturday morning. You should come, Vernon said. I will. That Saturday, Vernon walked into Louse Diner at 8 in the morning. There were four men sitting in a booth near the back. Wendell Pierce, 74, retired Finnish carpenter. Tyrone Jackson, 78, retired framer. Calvin Porter, 76, retired cabinet maker. Otis Greenwood, 73, retired concrete foreman. They waved Vernon over. He sat down. They ordered coffee, eggs, toast, bacon. They talked about the old jobs, the old crews, the old ways of doing things, Tyrone said. So you are the guy with the $68,000 hand plane, Vernon said. Was. I gave it to the Smithsonian, Calvin said. I read about that. Four planes, made by a black man in the 1700s. That's right. Caesar Chalor, Otis said. And you took them to a pawn shop. Vernon nodded. Kid offered me $60. All four men started laughing. Wendell said, $60 for Caesar Chalor. Tyrone said. That kid did not know, Vernon said. No, he did not, Calvin said. They never do. Vernon sipped his coffee. He looked around the table. At these men, all of them in their 70s, all of them with hands like his, scarred, thickened, strong. All of them builders, Wendell said. Your father would have been proud, Vernon said. I hope so, Otis said. He is. They sat in that diner for 3 hours, talking, laughing, remembering. And when Vernon finally stood to leave, Wendell shook his hand. He said, come back next Saturday, Vernon said. I will. He did. He went every Saturday after that. It became his routine. Louse Diner, 8 in the morning. Coffee with four old carpenters who understood what it meant to build something with your hands and to take care of the tools that let you do it. One Saturday in December, Vernon brought something with him. A photograph, the one Caleb had taken. The four Chalor planes laid out on the soft cloth. He set it on the table. Tyrone picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. He said, beautiful, Calvin said. You ever regret giving them up, Vernon said. No, they are where they belong, Wendell said. And where is that? Where people can see them, where people can learn the story, where Caesar Chalor's name will be remembered. Otis nodded. He said, most men do not get that, Vernon said. No, most men do not. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Tyrone said, you know what the best part of this whole story is? What's that? That kid in the pawn shop, Aaron. He learned something. Vernon smiled. He did, Calvin said. What did he learn? Vernon said, that you do not judge a tool by how it looks. You judge it by who made it, and who used it, and who took care of it. Wendell raised his coffee cup. He said, to Caesar Chalor. The other men raised their cups. To Caesar Chalor. Vernon raised his. To my father. They drank. Outside the diner, the snow started to fall, soft and quiet, covering the hills of Vermont, the same hills where Josiah Whittaker had built his first house in 1838, the same hills where Frederick had raised Howard, where Howard had raised Earl, where Earl had raised Vernon. 5 generations, one family, one set of tools, passed down, taken care of, preserved. Until the day a man who knew what he was looking at walked into a pawn shop and saw a stamp burned into the heel of a beechwood plane. C. Chalor, living in Wrentham, and the world remembered. Vernon Whittaker is 76 now. He still lives in the small house Earl built in 1956. He still drives the 2008 F-150. He still has coffee every Saturday morning at Louse Diner with Wendell and Tyrone and Calvin and Otis, and once a year in October. He flies to Washington, D.C. Marcus and Keisha go with him. Precious Johnson goes with him. They stand in front of the glass case at the Smithsonian. They look at the four planes Josiah brought from Boston in 1838. They look at the maker marks. C. Chalor, living in Rentham. They think about Caesar Chalor, stamping his freedom into every piece of work he did. They think about 5 generations of Whitaker men who took care of what they were given. They think about how a kid in a pawn shop dangled a plane by the iron and said 60 bucks, and how 15 minutes later everything changed. Because some things have hidden worth.